Thank you so much, Professor Park, and of course, thank you, Father Stephen, for this kind invitation to the Korean Society of Theology and Thought. Thank you for this inspiring, very inspiring, and a little exhausting conference, especially for the translators, that I suggest that we applaud now. And in order to facilitate their task, I will stick to reading my presentation. Well, I intend to address two questionable inferences. First, does the concept of creation out of nothing entail the claim that the universe is temporally finite? Or, to put it otherwise, in the form of the contrapositive statement, does the temporal boundlessness entail self-existence of the universe? This is a classical debate as to whether the universe could be eternal and nevertheless created, the debate that you have addressed. And second, does the converse entailment operate? Does the existence of boundaries entail that the universe is created? As regards the first inference, I will advocate the view that the boundlessness of the universe does not preclude the issue as to what makes it exist, and that the converse inference, boundary entails creation, does not work either. A physical boundary is not sufficient evidence for the metaphysical dependence of the universe upon a supernatural cause, although it seems to facilitate that dependence. I will first quickly inquire into why boundlessness of the universe has been traditionally supposed to preclude creation. I will then evoke the attempts made by the late Stephen Hawking in order to defeat creation with the no boundary condition, not from a technical point of view, since I'm just a philosopher. And I will afterwards suggest that we should abandon the transitional concept of creation. That is, we should abandon the concept of creation as the transformation of nothingness into being, and move to the relational concept of creation. And I will finally illustrate how Georges Lemaitre advocates the metaphysical neutrality of Big Bang. Well, to begin with, there is a traditional commitment of boundlessness to createdness. It is to be found in ancient materialism, where it is epitomized by Epicurus' principle: nothing comes out of nothing. And it is more obvious in the version of Lucretius: nothing comes ever divinely out of nothing. Epicurus clearly justifies the principle nothing out of nothing by the need of trackability in physical transformations. Every production requires some seed, some pre-existing substance, or some preceding state of affairs out of which it comes. Well, as such, it is a principle of causal closure, stipulating that the universe is closed under physical causality. Methodologically, it works, or at least let's see whether it works or not, whether it enables us to predict, to explain, and so on. It's a good way, if not the best way, of studying physics as a natural science. Follow some principle of conservation of matter energy, and so on. Okay. And of course, Epicurus makes also the claim that nothing becomes non-existent. The trackability is in both senses. So, are we allowed to shift from physics to metaphysics? Epicurus says that of all this there is no beginning, but the problem is in which sense? For both atoms and void exist from everlasting. But of course, here is a questionable assumption. If some fundamental entities have no physical beginning, does it entail that they are self-existing? Does the spatio-temporal boundlessness of the universe rule out the possibility of its metaphysical creation? Well, I will now turn to evoke quickly the echoes of this ancient Greek materialism in more contemporary debates. In the source of contemporary materialism, you find the presupposition that eternity of the world entails atheism. By Engels, for example, in Engels' Philosophy of Nature, he formulates what he terms the paramount question of the rule of philosophy, The question takes the following shape: which is primary, what is das Ursprüngliche, spirit or nature? And it turns this disjunction into an alternative. Did God create the world, or has the world been in existence eternally? So Engels ought to have read Aquinas in order not to raise so foolish questions. Clearly, Engels is implying that eternal existence precludes ontological dependence. You find the same kind of presupposition by Ludwig Plate, who intended to revive the causal closure of the universe, but not only as a methodological principle, but in order to provide an argument against creation of matter. As he puts it, matter exists, nothing proceeds from nothing. In consequence, matter is eternal, and therefore we cannot admit the creation of matter. Well, there is no consequence from statement 2 to statement 3, unless you have already supposed that a non-eternal matter has to succeed to nothing. But as we shall see later, to succeed to nothing is a very paradoxical phrase. And anyway, there is an account of creation in which statement 4 does not follow from 3. Well, let's turn now to the second point. Curiously enough, we find in recent contemporary popular cosmology a similar antipathy against boundaries, as if they had to be at all cost. The exciting reason for this antipathy is that it would be legitimate to infer God's existence from those singularities at which the laws of science break down. Hawkins seems to imply that any boundary or edge of space-time is crying out for divine intervention, whereas a boundless universe does not. Therefore, Hawking welcomes what he terms a new possibility, opened up by the quantum theory of gravity, in which there would be no boundary to space-time, and so there would be no need to specify the behavior at the boundary, as he says it. There would be no singularities at which the laws of science broke down, and no edge of space-time at which one would have to appeal to God or some new law to set the boundary conditions for space-time. This is one of the most famous claims made by Hawking in his brief history of time. One could say the boundary condition of the universe is that it has no boundary. The universe would be completely self-contained and not affected by anything outside itself. It would neither be created nor destroyed, it would just be. The universe would say, I am who I am. Okay, there is a shift here, clearly, from physics to metaphysics. From the methodological rule of physical closure to the claim of absolute self-existence of the universe. Well, this is the no-boundary condition elaborated by Stephen Hawking and James Hartle. I will not enter the discussion as to which extent the no-boundary model holds. This has already been addressed by most of you. And it's not my job anyway, and Professor Gabriel Gianti is my joker. But I'm considering the concept of being self-contained and not affected by anything outside itself. Once again, as a principle of methodology of physics, it may be useful or even correct. This is a claim that the universe is closed under physical causality. But does it imply that it is a necessary being per se, that he would just be? This is of course, highly questionable. Let's focus on how Hawking reasons. Hawking proceeds to contrast the traditional Newtonian picture of God winding up the clockwork of the universe, but this comparison is never to be found in the text of Newton, and setting up the initial conditions with the new picture of his cosmological model, where the universe is devoid of any kind of edge, boundary, or limit, and has no initial conditions. He writes, so long as the universe had a beginning, we could suppose it had a creator. But if the universe is really completely self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it would have neither beginning nor end, it would simply be. What place then for a creature. Here lurks a presupposition. Beginning is a necessary condition for supposing a creature, meaning that you cannot suppose a creature unless universe has a beginning. So creation entails beginning, temporal boundary, and the contrapositive statement gives no boundary, therefore no beginning, and then no place for a creature. I would like to stress the point that getting rid of singularities at all cost is a useless precaution against theistic metaphysics. For when studying physics, you should never appeal to God, for God is not a concept of physics. When studying physics, you are not dealing with supernatural powers or superguidance of the universe. And second, the universe from boundary to a creator is not valid, even in metaphysics. In fact, two kinds of boundaries are to be distinguished, epistemic boundaries and metaphysic boundaries. Of course, I do not pretend to be a better cosmologist than the late Professor Hawking. I do not even pretend to be a better metaphysician, since, as we shall see later, he himself admits that the inference from physical self-containment to metaphysical self-existence is false. But he very often makes such statements because because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. And as already recalled by some of you, nothing has here not the metaphysical meaning, but a physical meaning of quantum void and so on. Okay. But of course, there is a fashionable tendency for creation out of nothing, but without God. This is the mode of economic explanations. For example, this by Lawrence Krauss, or a very bizarre statement by Kollak and Martin. There is something because nothingness is unstable. Well, if nothingness refers to the quantum void, okay. I don't know, it is a job of physicists to tell me whether they are unstable or not states of affairs. But nothingness as a metaphysical concept, it is the kind of thing or of nothing to which you can ascribe no property, and of course not the property of being unstable. Well, this leads me to two accounts of creation, the transitional one and the ontological one. The transitional one is suspected of being mingled with the physical causation, and the ontological one is free from this mingling. And you can contrast two statements. Following the first view, God makes something exist out of nothing, and this violates the principle of physical closure of the world. But you could say, and this is the second interpretation, God makes not out of anything, something exists. And I don't know if the difference is clear, but I can make a comparison. If I say, I make you laugh, which is not the case, without reason, it can mean two things. It can mean that you laugh, but you have no reason to laugh, and I make you laugh without reason. I bring about a state of affairs in which you laugh, but you have no reason to laugh, but a cause to laugh, I make you laugh. Or I, without reason, make you laugh. There is a shift of the scope of the phase, and this is exactly what I mean by the shift from the transitional account to ontological account. Well, this contrast between relational account and transitional account is not new, of course. It had been perceived by Augustine, by Philo of Alexandria already in the 1st century. And you find it again in the 7th century when Samuel Clarke said, the question between us and the atheist is not whether the world can possibly have been eternal, but whether it can possibly be this original, independent, and self-existing being, which is a very different question. So we get not a simple picture with eternal uncreated worlds and temporally finite created worlds, but a picture with four possibilities. Either the world is everlasting and self-existent, it has always existed on its own without any external cause, like Epicurus, Lucretius, or Spinoza said, or it is the everlasting effect of a timeless or everlasting God. This is an idea supported by the Neoplatonists, by Avicenna, by Averroes somehow, by Aquinas as rational possibility, and by Leibniz. And two other possibilities. The universe is finite in time. It has one existed or just exists on its own without an external cause. Well, we cannot repeat the experience. We have no series of universe, of a temporally finite universe popping up into existence. So we cannot say, this is a statement made by, a claim made by Russell. They say, well, the universe just is there, that's all. It doesn't sound very intelligent metaphysically, but who knows? We need an argument to say that a temporally finite structure needs a cause in order to account for its existence. Or the last possibility, the universe was created at some point or at the beginning of time. Well, I wouldn't like to, I have to skip some things. There are many models of causal dependence without temporal successions, the reflections of a landscape on a lake. The comparison that Leibniz makes with a book everlasting copied, and even if it were infinitely copied along an infinite series of moments, there would still remain the question, who writes, who is the author of the book? Just a point, Hawkins himself, sometimes that you must read the whole text, he confesses that even if there is one possible unified theory, it is just a set of rules and equations. What is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe? And as he said, why does the universe go all the bother of existing? Those are metaphysical questions, and he addresses them. But of course, in order to sell paper, it is better to remember only the universe is self-contained, is self-necessary, and self-existing. Okay. And in a less popular work, himself confesses that the temporal parameter is neutral. The question as to whether why does the universe exist would arise even if the histories of the universe went back to the infinite past. Okay, even without temporal boundary, there will be. So, my last part is about the way Lemaitre advocates the metaphysical neutrality of Big Bang. Till now, I will skip that. This is on the paper because I want to skip to the argument. In fact, initially from the equations of general relativity, gravitational equation of general relativity, and then from the point of view of quantum theory, he gets the idea of the primeval atom. But as you could see, in the very first draft, the asymptotic value of the radius of the universe began at t minus infinite. So the idea of expanding universe is in no way necessarily committed to a temporal beginning. It is important to note that. Well, in fact, in this text, a short text sent to the celebrated review Nature, he said, well, my suggestion is correct, the beginning of the world happened a little before the beginning of space and time. This kind of consideration has already been addressed in our symposium. And George Lemaitre distinguishes two kinds of beginning, a physical and a metaphysical one. Physically, he says it is a beginning in that sense that if something has happened before, it has no observable influence on the behavior of our universe. The question, if it was really a beginning or rather a creation, something starting from nothing, is a philosophical question which cannot be settled by physical or astronomical considerations. But of course, in the common representation, Big Bang theories seem to provide us with a good starter for the classical cosmological argument. And this is an argument made by William Craig. Whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe as a cause. But the main point is, in which sense can we say that the universe began to exist? Physics can give us premise 2 as an outcome only in the physical sense, not in the metaphysical sense. There are inductive metaphysical reasonings concerning the probability that the universe is temporally finite. There is a good argument made by Richard Swinburne, but it is not here. What is it in question? Well, my worry about the treatment of nothing or nothingness by some physicists is that, well, have we observational or theoretical means to get a glimpse of nothing? Can we extrapolate any observational data to nothing at all? Have we any access to some absolute nothingness beyond the boundary or edge of space-time? No, and even along some theorem, the Born-Gottlieb theorem, the finite duration of the universe does not entail that it succeeds to nothingness. And there is a good reason for that, which is a logical one. In nothingness, there is no temporal metric, so nothing can succeed to nothingness. Well, so physics does not provide us with a state of affairs where there is nothing in the metaphysical sense. I now suggest to give an overview of Lemaitre's lecture of 1963. This lecture was unpublished till 2007, where in this lecture he makes clear some crucial points concerning the disentanglement of creation from Big Bang, or, to put it otherwise, of metaphysics from physics. He considers first the problem of extrapolation to the past from the point of view of general relativity, and then from the point of view of quantum theory. And in the first case, you have a zero value of the radius of the universe, which induces a physical beginning, and from the zero value of the radius, there are solutions in one direction only. So you get a natural stopping point of the theory, and there is no more concurrence between a physical extrapolation to the pre-world and supernatural suspension of the extrapolation. The same point is made from the point of view of quantic theory. And I like just now to sum up the reasoning of Lemaitre. But the whole lecture is worth being read. So, supernatural creation is a privative concept. When you say there is supernatural creation, when it would be the case if you should expect a regression towards a physical past, and this is what Lemaitre terms a pre-world, but you claim that the suspension, the regression is suspended. But if there is no talk of regression, you are left with a physical beginning and not with a supernatural creation. And even with edges or finite durations, you are not physically committed to a supernatural creation. But this does not imply that you are committed to the denial of supernatural creation either. And may I emphasize that supernatural creation can never be a physical topic. Natural science, it is not a scoop, are not in a position to deal with supernatural beings. In his last interview, Lemaitre makes exactly the same point. When inquiry into the nature of the beginning of space or the beginning of the multiplicity, you understand that it cannot have any past, that there is no anterior state of affairs that you would have to exclude by saying that it is created from nothing. The reasoning is quite subtle, but I think it is solid. As has been said, such a theory stays completely out of every metaphysical or religious issue. The materialist remains free to deny any transcendent being, and the problem of creation would be completely disentangled from that of cosmogony. But the problem of creation retains its complete metaphysical meaning, the meaning of the dependence of every being of ourselves. Physics and astronomy do not exhaust the whole reality. Pacific coexistence with cooperation is possible, but no overlapping. This was already the point made by Maxwell, who had a metaphysical argument to God, not reasoning on the line of design argument, but only of the existence of natural kinds, the repetition of structural properties and of dispositional properties. If we have reason to say that it is too big to be for being explained by science, so we have an argument to Creatio. but it is only an inductive argument, not a deductive proof. Well, following Lemaitre, cosmology does not offer us, this is my conclusion, the premise of an absolute beginning out of nothing. We are not allowed to infer nothingness from our ignorance. Neither does cosmology impose us the picture of an everlasting universe. But even if it were the case, this would not prejudge the metaphysical issue as to whether the universe owes its existence to a supernatural cause. Well, I am in time, which is an exploit for someone who advocates the timelessness of the world. Thank you.
열정적으로 강의해 주신 프로페서 클라비어 교수님께 다시 한번 큰 박수.